Thank you, Senator. First, I'd like to say myself and ATF as a bureau appreciates the invitation today. I feel this is very important, and I'd like to give you guys about 45 minutes to an hour of a very informative presentation. Before I start, I'd like to recognize the Special Agent in charge of the New York Field Division, Delano Reed, standing here against the wall. Along with my colleague and assistant for the day, Special Agent Adam Buczesi. I usually, as a good government soldier, don't cross the line into personal views. It's never seen as the proper thing to do. Today I might slowly violate and walk that fine line. I got on this job in 1989, and if you were to tell me that in 2015 I'd be before you talking about the growing crisis with shootings, especially shootings at houses of worship, and basically stand before you today to have to kind of give you an indoctrination on firearms nomenclature, what to look for in a weapon, I would look at you probably with three heads and said, you know, I don't think it would be possible. I don't see that. But we're there. We're at that point. So, as my mom would say, it is what it is, and now we need to deal with it. What I'm about to show you today, it's going to be a good presentation. I've brought many different types of weapons. You're all civilians. Maybe some of you have some type of military experience like the Senator, and you'll know what some weapons look like. But today I'm going to give you an array, not only weapons, but I've also brought some mock IEDs, improvised explosive devices, or pipe bombs in this case. Again, as the Senator said, they are inert. They are dead. The weapons are all, magazines are empty, there's no ammunition. So when you're looking at it, please don't get nervous. Everything has been rendered safe and you're all in good hands. First, let me start by letting you guys understand what a firearm is. A firearm defined by federal law is any device that's designed to expel a projectile, i.e. bullet, okay, through the act of an explosion. So a BB gun is not a firearm. A bow, a compound bow, is not a firearm. They expel projectiles, but not through the act of an explosion. A handgun, a revolver, a submachine gun, an assault weapon, a shotgun, these are all firearms. And as the Senator said, the assailant in the South Carolina shooting was using a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun. I brought a gun comparable in caliber. Let me just give you a minute worth of a 101 on the nature of what a weapon does. Adam, can you bring up a small round, and also bring up the 40, just so I can show. And then I'll have Adam walk around and let you see this even closer. This is a .40 caliber. It's a Sig Sauer. This was, at one point, the weapon that ATF carried as our primary and auxiliary weapons. In this case, it's a .40 caliber. Now, what are calibers? Calibers are basically sizes. They're designations of the actual ammunition. And this is a .40 caliber round. Okay, it's usually an aluminum casing. The bullet is this copper-topped. It's really the jacket of the round. The round is usually lead, and then manufacturers put a copper kind of blanket around the actual lead. And what that does, it's either fully jacketed or semi-jacketed or no jacket at all. And what that does is it keeps the projectile, the bullet, intact as it's fired. It goes down the barrel of the weapon and then goes out the muzzle into whatever it's designed to be shot at. The jacket is kept on the round so that the round stays intact. And when it hits its proposed target, it obviously has its full weight. It's usually jagged in shape, and then it will do its most damage in what it's hitting. When a round is fired, the firing pin from the gun hits what they call the primer. It's the back of this ammunition here. Inside this casing is filled with gases under very, very, very high pressure. When the firing pin hits the primer, it sets off a sequence of minor explosions inside this casing. The explosions begin to build to the point where the pressure gets so large, something's got to give. It obviously isn't going to give out of the primer area. So where does it give? It gives in the projectile area. So that's the amount of power that the bullet's getting. It's getting that explosions that are building up behind it to the point where the pressure builds so big, it sends the round through the barrel and out downrange. In this case, we have a .40 caliber. What does that designate? It's 0.40 inches in circumference. A .45 caliber is 0.45. It's a little larger. A .38, smaller. A .22, even smaller. So most calibers are in English measurement. Some calibers, however, are in European or metric measurement. So you have 5.56 and others which have American English equivalents. But that's the nature of what happens when you fire a round. The round is detonated, the bullet forms pressure behind it, and then it's sent down range through the barrel. Inside the barrel, usually of these weapons, are what we call lands and grooves. It's basically spiraling grooves and markings within the barrel that make this bullet spin faster. The faster that this bullet spins makes it more flat in its trajectory. And the flatter the round is, makes it more accurate when it's fired from a hand position, okay? And as the Senator said earlier, maybe today we'll learn how to recognize some of the people that come in. I don't know, maybe when the profiling comes up, that might be the case. But just so you know, you can see the size of this weapon. It's not very large. I'm armed today. I'm armed today. Okay? It's on my ankle. So sometimes recognizing someone who's carrying a weapon isn't as easy as some people would think. Some of the weapons I'm about to show you today are long guns, are rifles, are shotguns, are AK-47 type weapons. Yes, a little bigger, of course. Harder to conceal, yes. But a shotgun with its barrel cut off could easily fit right down my waistband and alongside my leg. So I just want to bring these things to your attention. Forewarned is forearmed. And that's what I'm here today to show you. And hopefully have you have that concept as you live your lives from this day on. Okay, so Adam, let's bring this around. And we'll show you what, you please. Again, this is the .40 caliber. It's a large caliber semi-automatic handgun. There are different types of weapons, however. The next thing I want to show you is a revolver, because the revolver, or the wheel gun as we call it, are still around, still out on the street, not as common, but still weapons that are used every day. People are being killed by them. Unlike the semi-automatic weapon, which is magazine fed, what does that mean? It has the loading device inside the actual grip of the weapon. This is a revolver. In this case, it's a .357 revolver. You can see it's got the areas, the barrel, where the rounds would go, right here. What's the difference with this weapon as opposed to the semi-automatic that you just saw? This weapon has a much slower cyclical rate of fire. The semi-automatic, as you're shooting it, the gases from that first round that let that bullet go down range, the gases will actually blow back the slide on that weapon, expel the casing, the empty bullet, the empty round, and then as the slide goes forward, would then lodge another round inside the chamber, ready to be shot. So in semi-automatics, you have a quick rate of fire. The assailant in South Carolina, again, .45, semi-automatic, can load very quickly. The gunman in Aurora, also, all semi-automatic weapons. This, however, doesn't fall into that category. This is a revolver. This weapon usually is 5 or 6 shot capacity. And every time you compress the trigger, you need to wait as this revolver slowly turns, usually in a clockwise fashion, and then puts the next round in line with the breech, in line with the firing pin, and ready to be fired. So you have less shot capacity, and you have less cyclical rate of fire. You're going to be shooting slower. So this is a revolver. Adam will show you this, along with the round that corresponds to this caliber, .357. Any questions so far from anyone? We will reserve some time at the end of the presentation for questions, but if anybody just is a little lost about what I've shown you so far now, definitely take a question or two.
That gives you a revolver gives you more time to react. So how much time do you have?
Well, good question. The question was, you know, you have time to react. You'll have more time with a revolver. Could be. I mean, if the proficiency of the shooter, look, revolvers have speed loaders too. The proficiency of the shooter is a huge variable with that. But is it scientifically a slower rate of fire than a semi-automatic pistol? No doubt. At the end of this presentation too, I want to address you guys with maybe 10 to 15 minutes of what happens to the human body if you're in a combat situation. I train agents that are new and coming on the job in what ATF calls CQC, or close quarter combat. And as you could imagine, if we're all sitting here now, we're all relaxed, our beats per minute are maybe 60 to 70 beats per minute, and you're all listening hopefully attentively to me, and then somebody, God forbid, walked in here with a weapon and began to shoot. What do you think would happen to the human body? Right? Your beat per minute would go from 60 to 70, where you're at right now, to probably anywhere between 140 to 180 beats per minute. You know there are physiological changes that rapidly go through the human body. And I'm going to address that because that's part of answering, ma'am, your question. You know, some people won't react. Some people in situations just are like deer in headlights and freeze. Some people run. Some people attack. These are all ways of handling the stress that the human body undergoes when you're in a combat situation. And aside from actually being in a combat situation, what ATF feels is very important to our agents, especially the new ones up and coming, and are out there now, and obviously are in the crosshairs, you know, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, is you're not going to be able to prepare or train for this. But if you know today, after leaving this presentation, what you could expect your body to do, it might not be the shock that it normally would be if and when this, God forbid, ever happened. And knowing that might make you do something you normally wouldn't do that could save your life or someone else's. So I will put 10 to 15 minutes of my presentation to that. It's very important. But for now, I'll continue with my show and tell. Bring up the next weapon. Show me a small semi-auto. Like the .40 caliber earlier, semi-automatic, they don't need to all be this big. This is, sure. This was a 380. 380, again, this was that English measurement, the European measurement, as opposed to the English measurement that I spoke about earlier. Here's a 380 or a 9mm short, and there's a 40 caliber, okay? Pretty much almost inside my hand. 25s, 22s easily fit inside my hand. Easily could fit inside my jacket pocket. Okay, so the concealability of these weapons, very easy to conceal. Something you definitely should know. And again, like the .40, it's a semi-auto. If you look at the bottom, Adam just showed where the magazine would be fed. That's where the clip, as the street vernacular, or the magazine would be inserted. And it's usually rounds that are staggered like this. It's got a high tension spring with a floor plate at the bottom. And as the shooter's firing, and the gases are blowing back, expelling that spent shell, and the new one going, the spring is feeding the bullets into the chamber so that the gun could fire the next round. So you can see how the cyclical rate of fire on a semi-automatic is much quicker than the manually operated wheel gun or revolver. Okay, thank you. Yes. Sometimes many of you hear in the news, oh, the assailant had an Uzi. In my experience, a lot of times we'd go out, we'd have informants telling us, all right, the bad guy or the bad girl has a gun to sell, it's an Uzi. Sometimes it wouldn't be an actual Uzi, which is a term for an Israeli brand of weapon, a high-end weapon. Sometimes it would be what this gun here is, which is an Intratec. Now this is a very, very low-grade, low-quality weapon made in this country in Florida by a company called Intratec. They usually shoot either 22 or 9mm rounds. The gun retail is about $150. Very, very low quality alloy metals used in the gun. And there really is no other purpose for it than for criminal purposes. I mean, it's not high quality. It's not something that someone would collect, per se. It carries the magazine here, a little less concealable, but a lot more round capacity. And in the late 80s and early 90s when I got on this job, this was one of the weapons that you would predominantly see. This company was churning them out at an alarming rate, and they were coming to New York and being recovered on the streets of New York at an alarming rate as well. Any questions about the Tech 9? Please. Magazine capacity on that at the time, because the law now has changed with the SAFE Act, Governor Cuomo 2 years ago, and now there's limits on magazine capacities. But at the time that weapon was being purchased, you could get a magazine with 15, and then you could actually buy even extended magazines. So it would come down even lower. I believe 30 at the time was a long magazine. Now with the SAFE Act, I'm glad you brought that up, I can at least talk about that. Magazines now are limited to a 7-shot capacity when it comes to semi-automatic weapons. So everybody who's got the 10-round magazines or more have to turn them in and buy new magazines with 7-shot, those who conform with the law. Licensing? I'll just get quickly into licensing, just because it really isn't the purpose of today's speech today before you. But for New York City, being one of the largest cities in the world, you could imagine we have some of the toughest gun laws with respect to possession in the entire country. And the way it works here in New York is if you want a weapon, they basically have 3 licenses that you could get. You could get a home permit or a premise permit. You could get a target permit, or you could get a full carry, which is the toughest one to get, because you need to then justify to the powers that be within the NYPD and within the city why you need a weapon in your daily course of business. It's very tough to get, it's not impossible. Usually it's given to people who, for whatever reason, carry large amounts of cash during the day. Premise permit, you're only allowed to keep the weapon in your house as a means of protection. And a target permit, you're allowed to take the weapon with you to and from a firearms range. But that's it. When you have that weapon, you have very, very stringent conditions on how you have to carry it. When you go to the range, you can't have the weapon on you. The weapon's got to be safeguarded in the car, in a box. The ammunition has to also be safeguarded in a separate area away from the gun. If ever anyone who has a target permit is involved in something and they have the gun on them and say they use it, you know the investigators will be looking at, where were you going? Oh, the range. Did you go? But we're going to go see if you're in the book as having visited the range. And if you are going to the range, have you been there before, or is this the first time you're going to the range? These are some of the things that the investigators will be looking at, just because they don't want people who get target permits to abuse it and then think that at that point they can carry it like a full carry. And if they were to get stopped, use the range as the excuse. Okay, next weapon we're going to get into, long guns. I guess you should take out the shotgun first. And also bring the two different types of rounds, please, out. Now, what I've shown you up until now are handguns, whether it's a semi-auto or a revolver. This here is a 12 gauge shotgun. It's been made tactical because it's one of the weapons that we carry in our course of business as ATF agents. And by that I mean it's got a loader where we're able to quickly load other rounds into it. It's got an aim point sight. It's got a ported barrel. These holes here which will release the gases that come when the slug or the shot shell is fired. It releases the gases even more effectively, making the shooter able to control this weapon and then acquire the target again. Instead of shooting, having the recoil send us way up and taking the time to get back into our target acquisition. So this weapon is not like many shotguns you'd see on the street, but it does have all the characteristics of a shotgun. It shoots 12 gauge. And when you talk about a shotgun, you have two different rounds that you could possibly fire. You have a slug, which is just like a bullet in the handguns, but now it's in a shotgun shell casing, and there you could see the slug, the actual lead. In this case, because it's 12 gauge, it's literally 500 grains of lead. The amount of energy that this will have when it's fired out of this weapon is unbelievable. This kind of weapon could take down a large, wild game, an animal hundreds and hundreds of pounds. The other round that you can fire from shotgun is shot shell. And all that is, just to kind of give it to you in layman's terms, is a casing, again, the same mechanics as a handgun round. You have your casing at the bottom, your primer at the bottom, you have your casing. In this case, it's not aluminum like most bullets. It's a hard plastic. And you have your accelerants, your powders in there that are going to start that series of explosions. But in this case, because you see this top like this, it's not the slug, it's shot shell. What's in here? BBs, small BBs. And depending on the size of the shotgun shell that you're using, they're in numbers. There's double odd buck, which means that the rounds in here are the largest marbles, if you will. There's about 13, I believe, in double odd buck. Then as you go up in numbers, you go down in size. So you can get size 3, size 4, size 5, size 6. Size 6 being a shotgun shell that has the tiniest marbles in it, or shot shell. Now, why the difference in size? Because when people use shotguns for recreational purposes, you can use a slug, and again, like I said, shooting a wild game, large animal, and it will take it down. If you're shooting, say, birds or varmints or smaller animals, shooting that animal with a slug would obviously decimate it, right? So what shot shell is as it's shot out, the pellets go through the barrel, and then as soon as they go out, they spray. What you'll see used by criminals, unfortunately, is sawed-off shotguns. Now why? For two reasons. Number one, as I said earlier, the concealability. You cut down a barrel, and usually a shotgun barrel by federal code, is 26 inches long. If you begin to cut down a barrel. Cut it down, and some guys just do it very crudely with a saw. You have it now made much more concealable. But what have you also done to the ballistics of that gun, especially if you're using shot shell? You've now made the barrel that much shorter. You've now created a situation where the pellets get out to the public, get out to the air in front of it a lot faster, and thereby have more of a chance of widening as it's going down range to its target. So what does that mean? If you're shooting a sawed-off shotgun, I could shoot it in this general direction and probably pepper 90% of the room with the shell inside the casing. Because now it's being by its alteration, it's made it now possible to cover a larger area of landmass. Understood on that? Please, Adam, show that around. Thank you. By the way, I've left my business card with the Senator's staff in the back. After this presentation, I would definitely invite you to grab a card. If you had any personal questions, feel free to call my office or email me. I have no problem entertaining any other personal questions that you would have. Are there any questions up until this point? I'm trying to give you guys the 101 with respect to firearms.
Training session, a reference to the training session, and outline that you can do meeting with license.
Well, the question was, would clergy be able to go to the NYPD and get a firearms license? Is that the question, Doctor? Again, well, first of all, I'm a federal agent, so I don't deal with licensing, especially with respect to gun licensing in the city. That would be an NYPD question, and I know NYPD is here, so they'd be better to field that question. But again, to get a license, depending on what type, you'll need to justify the reasons why you'd want one. And I know plumbers who have full carry permits because of the amount of money they carry with respect to their installation of their equipment on an everyday basis. So it's not an impossible feat, but as you can imagine, in a city of approximately 12 million people, they don't give them out easily. The last weapon I'd like you to see, I think I have 2 weapons left or 1? Just one. This is an AK-47 rifle. It's just actually a variant of AK-47s. Now, the AK-47, the Auto Kalashnikov, was named after a Russian who designed the weapon, and it was predominantly the weapon used by the Russians in many of their wars in the 40s and the 50s. Many manufacturers have now taken on reproducing it their own way, so you have AK-47 variants. A rifle, not a shotgun. Let me see that rifle. This is the Projector Bullet that is fired out of this weapon. 223. You can see it's a smaller projectile, fully jacketed though. A lot of gas in here. This weapon usually fires anywhere between, I think, 28 and 3,200 feet per second, depending on the ammunition that you put in it. Very fast round. If a police officer or someone is shot with it and they have a vest on, they would still probably die if they're hitting a vital area, because this round is so fast, it will actually penetrate through the vest, go through the anatomy, and then outside the other side of the vest. That's how fast it is and how devastating of a round it is. It will defeat any body armor. It will defeat most of our armor that we carry when we go into search warrants. Items like the full body bunker, all rounds, handgun rounds, could be taken by that bunker. You shoot a .223 at the bunker, it will go through it like a hot knife through butter. Very dangerous, again, out there in the public. It's got a collapsible stock in this case. So in 1 second, I've made it from semi-concealable, that could have easily fit into that duffel bag, which is what I brought it in, or a knapsack. And now I've brought it out to the point where I've got my shoulder, I'm able to shoot it, I'm able to operate this weapon as it is designed, 223 AK-47 variant. Any questions on that?
How many rounds that magazine carries?
That is magazine fed as well, and I believe that's usually anywhere between 10 and 20 from the manufacturer. To get both. I promised that I wanted to end on physiologically what happens in a combat situation, and I'm going to share with you some things that I share with federal agents that are in my bureau. Again, I like using this example. We're here now. God forbid an armed assailant walked in. Everyone's different, everybody reacts different. But regardless of how we react, we're all human, and our body will undergo rapid changes. Our heart rate will go, again, from anywhere between 60 to 70 to anywhere in upwards of 160 to 180 beats per minute. What happens to us when that happens? Well, most firefights are 21 feet and less. That's 7 yards and less. It's a national average. In that time, many police officers, their first shot, believe it or not, they're missing the assailant and shooting low. And we've come to figure out why it is. It has nothing to do with the lack of training. It's because the officer's in a combat situation, and when all of a sudden the world hits the fan there, your eyes, your corneas actually warp. So what might look like, ma'am, you're about 8 feet away from me, you might look 12 feet away from me. Your eyes change. Auditory exclusion. What does that mean? I shut everything out through my hearing. My vision goes very, very narrow. I have the blinders on. I am in a combat situation. I don't see peripherally. I see only in front of me. My hands get very clammy. I don't really have good grip. I have no fine motor skills. So what does that mean? If I had to pick up a colleague who was shot and then it was expected to maybe put a key into a door to unlock the door to get out, I won't have the dexterity to do that. What happens? I revert back to the caveman days. I have the fight or flight syndrome. I have only gross motor skill power. What does that mean? I could push and I could pull. But to do anything that requires any dexterity, I lose. These are things I tell the agents. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean you're not adequately trained. It means you're human. But what it does mean is you need to know it. Because if you do know it, and this happens, God forbid, in your life, handle the stress. Know how to handle the stress. Any questions on that?